Is Carlos Sainz underrated? Is Carlos Sainz better than Charles Leclerc? Is Carlos Sainz better than Lewis Hamilton? And finally, has Ferrari made a mistake by firing Carlos Sainz and having a Charles Leclerc-Lewis Hamilton lineup? In this video, we try to answer these questions. The start of the 2024 season could not have been better for Carlos Sainz. He started the season with a podium in Bahrain and followed it up with a stunning win in Melbourne. Now that is a brilliant start to the season, and what it has done is that it has raised quite a few questions. One of the biggest ones is whether Ferrari has made a mistake when it fired Carlos Sainz. Now the entire belief system around these views stems from the fact that Carlos Sainz has had a brilliant start to the season. However, there is one key question that we need to answer, and that is how good is Carlos Sainz as a driver? Now to answer that question, what we'll try to do is we'll try to use data. And how we do that is we compare Carlos Sainz versus Charles Leclerc during their stint at Ferrari. Now Charles Leclerc is a driver who is considered one of the top drivers in F1. And if Carlos Sainz fares favorably or even is very close to Leclerc in terms of different statistics, then it will show that Carlos Sainz is probably one of the top drivers in F1. So let's take a look at what the data says and ultimately make our opinion on the basis of that. Now, to gain a better understanding of how the two drivers compare at Ferrari, we'll take a look at how these two drivers fared year by year. To see how these drivers compared in each season, we'll take a look at the overall qualifying number. We'll take a look at the number of driver errors these two drivers made during the season. Then we'll take a look at number of races where their qualifying got impacted and ultimately they fell back compared to their teammate because of a reliability issue, a team error, something that happens often at Ferrari, and to an extent, just bad luck. Now, to gain a better understanding of how these two drivers stack up, we'll minus this team error column from the overall value to have a better idea of how these two drivers compare when luck, reliability, and team errors are not part of the equation. Now, just like in qualifying, we'll do the same exercise in the races as well. So with that being said, let's begin. Let's take a look at how these two drivers compared in the 3 seasons they've been together. So in 2021, if we ignore the team error bit, we had 13 qualifyings where Charles was ahead and we had 8 qualifyings where Carlos was ahead. Similarly, if we take a look at the races, the number was the same. It was 13 races where Charles was ahead and 8 races where Carlos was ahead. Now, if we take the team error into consideration, in case of qualifying, the number dropped down to 12 for Charles and 7 for Carlos. And in the race, the number was 13 in favor of Charles and 7 in favor of Carlos. Now let's take a look at the 2022 season. Now looking at the 2022 season, and what we see here is that the data is more skewed towards Leclerc. First of all, if we don't take team error into consideration, in qualifying we had 15 for Charles and 6 for Carlos. In the races, it was 12 for Charles and 9 for Carlos. Now if you guys remember, the 2022 season had far too many races where team error played a major role. And there were far too many races where reliability, strategy, and bad luck as well, they did compromise the races for both the drivers. Now for Charles specifically, there were 6 races that were compromised because of this, and for Carlos, there were 2 races that had this kind of an impact. In qualifying as well, there were 2 races where reliability played a role for Charles, and there was 1 qualifying session where it impacted Carlos as well. Now this is where the true impact becomes more and more apparent, because once we start taking the team error into consideration, the gap becomes even bigger. In qualifying, the gap is 15-4 in favor of Charles, and in races, it is 10-3 in favor of Charles. Now let's take a look at what the data says for the 2023 F1 season. Now for 2023, if we keep the team error to one side, in qualifying we have a figure of 14-8 in favor of Charles. And in races, we have a figure of 12-10, again in favor of Charles, but a number that seems much closer. If we take team error into consideration, the number becomes wider. In qualifying, it's not much of an impact as the number is 14-7 now in favor of Charles. In races, the number splits wide open and it becomes 12-5 in favor of Charles, because there were as many as 5 races where either team strategy, unreliability, or bad luck impacted his overall weekend. Now once we've had a look at all 3 seasons, let's take a look at how the cumulative number appears. Now once we are taking a look at the cumulative number, first if we ignore the team error bit, in qualifying Charles qualifies ahead almost 66% of the times. And in races, Charles finishes ahead almost 60% of the time. Now, once we take the team error into consideration, we have an even wider gap. In qualifying, the number jumps to almost 70%, and surprisingly, in races as well, the number jumps to 70%. And that is something that shows the gulf between the two drivers. Now, once we've had a look at the entire data and the comparisons between Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, I think the question that needs to be answered is how good is Carlos? I think if we take a look at the fact that Carlos competing with a top tier driver is losing 70% of the time, then that should tell you something. While Carlos has his moments, he had his moment in Melbourne, he has his moment in Singapore last year as well. The thing is, those are his peaks. Overall, if we take everything into consideration and take data of every weekend into account, it just shows that the gulf is too big. I think the biggest example to actually illustrate this gulf is, well, if we take a look at Carlos Sainz when he last won a race in Singapore in 2023 and when he won the race in Melbourne in 2024. Melbourne was the first race in that 9-race stretch where Carlos beat Charles Leclerc in qualifying. It was also the first race where Carlos beat Charles Leclerc in terms of performance. And that should tell you everything about the kind of gulf there is between a top driver like Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Now, to answer the questions that we'd asked at the start of the video, let's just go through them one by one. First of all, is Carlos Sainz underrated? I'd say that's not the case. I think Carlos Sainz is a strong, solid driver, a strong performer, but he's not your Max Verstappen, he's not your Charles Leclerc, and he does not belong in that category. Then, is Carlos Sainz better than Charles Leclerc? The answer is no. Is Carlos Sainz better than Lewis Hamilton? Let's be fair, if we are going to start jumping to conclusions after 3 races, then more often than not, we are going to be wrong. Lewis Hamilton is probably one of the best talents to ever race in Formula 1, and he showed last year that he still belongs in the top category of drivers. And finally, did Ferrari make a mistake by signing Lewis Hamilton and getting rid of Carlos Sainz? No, Ferrari did not. That was a perfect decision, and that was a decision where an elite driver will be teamed up with a superstar. Ferrari has made the best possible choice, and there are no two ways about it. And yes, while there are many pundits that have claimed a multitude of things, data does not lie. And in this video, I've primarily used data to reach conclusions. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Do let me know what you think. Is Carlos Sainz better than Charles Leclerc in your view? If yes, why? Drop your views in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.